everybody. I'm Larry Eichel, Project Director of the Pew Charitable Trusts Philadelphia Research Initiative. We provide research and analysis on key issues facing the city. Thanks to all of you here in this room and watching online for joining us on what we think is going to be a very informative conversation on an important topic. We'll be live tweeting throughout the morning from @PewTrusts and encourage you to participate using the hashtag #PewTalksCriminalJustice. Today's conversation about criminal justice policies coincides with the release of our new report, Philadelphia 2019, The State of the City. This is the 10th anniversary of Pew's State of the City report, and this year it's more comprehensive than ever, presenting 90 statistical indicators of life in Philadelphia. You can find it at pewtrust.org/state of the city, along with interactive digital content that explores how the city has changed over the past decade. Before we start talking about Philadelphia and how Philadelphia and other jurisdictions are reforming their criminal justice policies, I want to paint a picture of what's been happening in this city, our city, based on Pew's latest findings. Because in 10 years, many elements of life here have changed significantly, including a big decrease in the city's jail population. And there are other things that haven't changed much at all. On the positive side, there are more jobs in the city than at any time since 1991, and unemployment is at its lowest level since 2000. The population has been rising for more than a decade, becoming ever more diverse. At last count, 15% of Philadelphians were Hispanic and nearly 8% were Asian, and that's a very big change. The 4-year high school graduation rate in the public schools has risen to 69%, still well below the national rate, but up 12 percentage points in 10 years. But not everything is on the upswing. The city's poverty rate has been stuck around 26% for the past 5 years, even as the rate has fallen in other cities. That means that nearly 400,000 Philadelphians must cope with life below the poverty line. And beyond the daily struggles of those 400,000 people, nearly a third of whom are children, poverty affects the entire city, increasing the demand for city services, reducing the city's ability to pay for them, and limiting the economy's ability to grow. In addition, the opioid crisis is taking a toll. There were more than 1,100 drug overdose deaths in Philadelphia in 2018, one of the highest rates in the nation. Opioids have contributed to a big increase in the city's unsheltered homeless population and continue to impact the public health and justice systems. Last year, there were 351 homicides in the city, an increase of 11% over the year before and the most since 2007. The increase has been attributed by police in part to an increase in drug-related killings. When we look at public safety more broadly, however, the incidence of crime has been trending downward for a decade. And the population in Philadelphia's jails has been falling as well, due to several city initiatives, about which you're going to hear more today, including those backed by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation. Just a few years ago, Philadelphia had one of the highest jail populations on a per capita basis of any jurisdiction in the country, no more. With those developments in mind, our event today focuses on two key aspects of the criminal justice system: what happens to people before their cases are resolved, and what happens post-resolution, after they are placed on probation and parole. As you will hear, much has been done in these areas, and more remains to be done. Our two panels feature individuals who are working to address these issues in Philadelphia and in New York City, Houston, Chicago, and the state of New Jersey. Again, we invite everyone to join the conversation using the hashtag #PewTalksCriminalJustice. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Mike Thompson. As Vice President and Head of Government Performance at the Pew Charitable Trusts, Mike oversees Pew's work across the country in areas of public safety and justice. He's going to tell you more about our work in these areas, then introduce our panelists. Mike, up to you.
Thanks, Larry. Good morning, everybody. You can hear me okay? All right. Thank you very much, Larry. Thank you very much, Fraser Rita, the Vice President overseeing so much of our work in Philadelphia. What a pleasure to be here with all of you. Before I get right into it, many of you can identify with the situation where you get to be up on stage and they hand you everything and you just get going. But you all know there's so many people behind it who make it all possible. So I just want to thank a number of my colleagues who've done a lot of behind-the-scenes work for this. Eleanor Hyder oversees the Philadelphia Policy Exchange, so thank you, Eleanor, and Brett Beckerson, who's done so much work on this. Aaron Corbett-Wright, Liz Lowe, all from the Philadelphia team working either on communications or policy work, played a key role in making this happen, so thank you very much. As Larry mentioned, my work, I'm based out of our DC office in Pew, overseeing a variety of issues ranging from health to fiscal policy and family and youth issues. And the common denominator of anything we do, as you can see from a lot of the materials that are in your folder, is around really bringing data to bear and really asking how we can bring numbers, facts, the latest research, and really use that to inform policy and practice on the front lines in communities across the country. And as many of you can also appreciate, many of our friends in Philadelphia and their Philadelphia office think we have it so easy in DC, right? We just crunch the numbers and then send it out into the ether, and then sort of everybody can make the magic happen in the communities across the country. Our friends in Philadelphia and the Philadelphia office constantly reminding us that behind these numbers and trends, there are complicated systems, there are communities, there are individuals, and that's where it really gets complicated. And so for that, we have a wonderful partnership with our Philadelphia office where we translate these big ideas and really see how they work every day on the ground. So there's no better illustration of that, really, I think, than criminal justice issues. Today, right, what criminal justice person isn't going to say, I don't really care what the data says. That doesn't really matter, right? Evidence-based practices, we try to do the opposite. Collaboration, no, we go it alone, right? No one talks that way anymore in the justice system. And for those of you who are sort of relatively new to this, you can sort of think, well, of course it's that way. But for those of us who've been working on these issues for decades, we remember a different time. Many of us can go back and schooled in the implications of the Willie Horton political ads and what that meant for running tough on crime. Pennsylvania, everybody will tell you the stories of Mudman and what that meant for crime policy in Pennsylvania. Now, today, and again, if you were in a time machine, this would just be unbelievable. What's the one issue that our national leaders can agree on above all else? It's criminal justice reform, right? That's the one piece of legislation that they were able to agree on, which is really, truly extraordinary when you think back to a different time when this was an issue where there was no common ground whatsoever except to make sure that you were tougher than the next person. So that said, when you look at some of the changes that have occurred across the country, particularly as things picked up speed in the mid-2000s, people would really focus on the state reforms and what had happened at the state level. And Pew has a long history of working with some states, more than 30 across the country, to make some major changes that have resulted in increasing public safety, saving money, and really improving outcomes for lots of individuals. But what we were hearing from across the country is you're talking about change at the state level, but that really masks what's happening at the ground every day in 3,000 counties, 18,000 localities across the country. That's where people are churning in and out every day. That's where we really need to be focusing. And what's really exciting over the past few years is how much national attention is, in fact, focusing on those front lines. So we have a lot of different initiatives to thank for that. We've got the MacArthur Foundation represented here today. Their Safety and Justice Challenge, which represents over $150 million investment trying to propel change in counties and cities across the country is really quite extraordinary. A bail project thinking about how to really expedite the situations where you have people eligible for bail but can't get out, just even though these are relatively small amounts of money. Major pretrial reforms happening in states like New Jersey, California, New Mexico, litigation that's cropping up around the country. Things focused on issues like mental health and stepping up, police reforms happening in one city across the country. There is a lot of stuff happening in counties and cities across the country. Pew's excited to be a part of that. We have terrific team members here, and Mike Williams and Terry Schuster and Connie Utada, looking at jails, community corrections, also an increasing focus of our work. So we thought, just given all that, what better thing to do than have a conversation right here in Philadelphia on these national trends, but with a special focus on what's happening here in Philly. And so we have this wonderful panel here first that's going to focus on really what happens when people are first coming into contact with a system, from arrest through their booking into jail, and how can we actually improve those processes. And we've got some great and very large urban areas represented here. Throughout the day, we're going to have, or the morning I should say, Philly, Harris County, that's Houston, New Jersey, the entire state, which is I'm a native New Jerseyan, and we get frustrated that we're sort of suburbs of Philly and New York, so large urban areas there. Cook County, Chicago, and all of New York City. Now, what's really important as we sort of pivot from one of these jurisdictions to the next is how different they are, right? They're all large urban areas, but let me just give you a little bit of a flavor for some of the major differences. In Philadelphia here, they refer to it as the Department of Prisons. Now, that's not an actual prison, as many of other folks on the panel know it. That's actually their jail. They just say prison, which I find fascinating, right? And you can do in the county prison up to 2 years for a sentence, which is unusual by many county standards. And in Philadelphia, you have one police department, right, for the entire city. And the jail or the prison is not run by a sheriff, but in fact appointed by the mayor. So all common knowledge in Philadelphia, but let me now pivot to a place like Harris County or Chicago, where that is wildly different. There they, of course, know that the jail is run by the sheriff. In Cook County or Harris County, over 100 police departments in each one of those counties alone, 100 different local law enforcement agencies that you're dealing with. Then go to a place like New Jersey, where we don't even call them district attorneys, we call them county prosecutors, and county prosecutors aren't elected. They actually have to receive directives from the state attorney general, which can inform how they practice. And the state attorney general, wait for it, not elected, actually appointed by the governor, right? How foreign does that sound to so many of our other panelists when you hear about their state? So, and then, if we go to Cook County, there we're literally talking about hundreds of elected judges, and also appointed judges, many of whom must then absorb these different policy changes that are happening. And of course, New York City always wants to tell us how no other place compares to that, with its 5 boroughs, which are really like 5 counties, except there's one mayor who runs the whole thing, and on it goes. So I want you just to keep that in mind as we go through these different jurisdictions. What they also will share in common is a little bit of a competitive streak. Each of these places is going to tell you why they'll be playing baseball in October. I'm a Mets fan, so apologies to Phillies fans. I hope we're there ahead of you. They'll also sort of make a bizarre case as to why you should spend spring break in those particular places. But most of all, what they're going to tell you is how hard it is to do anything in their jurisdictions. They're going to tell you why their place is incredibly complicated, and we need to really appreciate, I think, the unique challenges they each face. So hopefully that has kind of gotten you really excited for the next 2 panels that we're going to have. Our first one, which is going to focus on, again, sort of what happens at that very front end, coming in from arrest into the jail, and some trends there and some different ideas and strategies. And then we're going to pivot from that to community corrections and probation. I've told each of our panelists we're not doing PowerPoints. We're going to have a very interactive conversation. They're game for it. I've encouraged them to interrupt each other, interrupt me, and we'll have sort of a good Philly-style conversation, right? So everybody ready? And we're going to invite you to be involved with questions, too, as we go along. So, Brett, we doing okay on time so far? Good, okay. All right, here we go. So let me introduce our panelists. You have their bios, but just sort of in right to left. Keir Bradford Gray is the chief defender here of the Legal Defender Association here in Philadelphia. Sitting next to her is Rachel Eisenberg. She's the project manager for the MacArthur-related initiative here in Philadelphia on jails. Jennifer Pettis is the Jennifer Pettis is the director of trial court services in New Jersey, working for the court system. And Cara Smith is the chief policy officer for the sheriff in Cook County. They are each playing very important roles in many of the changes that are happening in their jurisdictions. You have their bios, so I'm not going to get into that here. Really impressive backgrounds, extremely knowledgeable on this subject. We're going to start with just a quick overview of what's happening in each of their systems. And so I've asked a representative from each of these jurisdictions just to give us a thumbnail sketch. What's happening to your jail population recently? What are you seeing with the numbers and the composition? We'll start with our hosts here in Philadelphia. Rachel, just the facts. What do you see as some general trends right now?
Well, thank you very much for having me. Thank you to Pew and everybody for having this conversation today. So in Philadelphia, we have seen pretty historic reductions in our local jail population since we began the Safety and Justice Challenge in 2015. Our jail population today is 4,494 individuals, and that is a 44% reduction from our baseline from July 2015, and that's actually a 50% reduction from 2008. So our population has been declining, and the way that we really identify trends in our jail population here is looking at the population on a given day and breaking it out by a detailed set of confinement reasons and figuring out sort of which confinement categories are the ones that are contributing the most to our jail population. So when we started our reform effort, our pretrial only population without any detainers on them and not being held without bail was the largest driver of our jail population. And as of this month, for the last few months, that hasn't been the case. That portion of our population has gone down approximately 1,200 people. And so we've seen pretty substantial reductions in many of the categories of our jail population. So we're very proud of what we've been able to accomplish, and we've been implementing changes across the system really to drive down our population in a way that it is equitable and preserves public safety.
Thanks, Rachel. So really incredible historic declines in the population jail here in Philadelphia. Jennifer, what are you seeing in counties across New Jersey?
First, I would just like to clarify that I am not a frustrated New Jersey resident living in the shadow of Philadelphia. I'm a native Philadelphian, and I bask in the shadow. So North Jersey has a different issue going on. But so in New Jersey, we have a statewide look at the jail population. We have 21 different counties, and each of those counties has a jail. Some are combined. But our jail population has dropped 6,000 from October 2012 to October 2018. And we're seeing a difference of between, it was 12,000 in October 2012 and now 8,000 in 2018. So we see 3,000 fewer black defendants, 1,500 fewer white, and 1,300 fewer Hispanic defendants in that population. And our jail population has declined significantly since 2015. It has declined coincidentally 44% as well. And one of the big changes has been our criminal justice reform that came about, but also preparing for that reform effort in 2013 and 2014 when our Chief Justice convened a committee of stakeholders from all three branches of government to talk about the criminal justice system and what could be done to address problems of low-risk defendants who didn't have the means to post bail being in the jail for an extended period of time awaiting their trial date. So we've had a lot of fluctuation in our jail population.
So overall, though, when you look at about a 5-year trend, you have seen declines.
Absolutely declining, yeah.
Thank you. Cara?
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me. One of the great consequences of being a mom in this work is that your kids know the difference between a jail and a prison. And my senior in high school came home recently so thrilled that she was able to correct her teacher that he was referring to a prison, but she corrected him that it was actually a jail. So in Chicago, in Cook County Jail, as Mike said, the sheriff runs the jail. For a while, I think we were the largest single-site jail in the country, meaning our whole jail compound is on one chunk of land at 26th Street in California. We went from an average daily population of 9,600 in 2014 to the current average daily population of 5,700, and today's population is about 5,500. So we've seen a dramatic decline in our jail population. We also run a community corrections program, a pretrial electronic monitoring program that was born out of a time when the Cook County Jail was under a federal consent decree for overcrowding. And I can get into this more during our panel, but we've seen a dramatic change in the composition of that program. So while it used to be a program for low-level offenders who perhaps had failures to appear, it is now a place where I think judges are setting a bond that the defendant can afford, but they're putting electronic monitoring on them in the community when they're charged with violent offenses. So we have some challenges in our community corrections side of it. But I think that jails can play a particularly important role in advancing bail reform because you have a front row seat to it. So we have embarked for the last 6 years on a program of trying to surface and point out why people should care about this, whether you are social justice minded with a soul, or whether you're just looking at the economics of unjust practices. I think we can make those cases really compellingly, and we have strived to do that over the last, again, 6 or so years.
So 3 jurisdictions, 3 sets of dramatic changes over a really short period of time in terms of major declines in the jail population. And the next question may seem straightforward, which is sort of, why has this happened, right? Let's look at the numbers. Well, as we want to probe through this question, it's not as a straightforward answer as you might think. And so I'm going to ask our panelists to tell us what they know and what they think, and to make a distinction between the two, because there's a lot of complicated, different kinds of trends to pull apart. So I'm going to ask the same 3 people to speak one more time through this, and then I'm going to come back to you, Keir, with some questions about some of the policy changes. So Rachel, you want to start?
Sure. So I think I started a little bit on this, but I think what we do know is how the changes that we've seen over time as it relates to the reasons that people are being held in custody. So whether it's people who are in pretrial only and the declines that we've seen in that population, the declines we've seen in our sentenced population, which is 730 fewer people on a given day, and also declines in our Philadelphia detainer only population, which as of this month was 620 fewer people on a given day. And so that really helps us drive the reform effort in Philadelphia, which as a result of the Safety and Justice Challenge has been truly collaborative among our criminal justice partner agencies, both within the Kenney administration as well as within our court system, our public defender, our district attorney. And so we are able to look at trends by month and see if the programs that we're implementing to address each individual target population are actually having an impact. And the other thing that we do know is that while we've seen reductions in our jail population, the rate of racial and ethnic disparities in our jails hasn't changed. And so that is something that as a collaborative we have really taken on seriously, because we as a system are going to have to think about how to implement strategies that specifically aim to drive down disparities, or we won't just see an impact by implementing strategies that are just aimed at the general population. So those are areas where we're going to be focusing over the next 2 years of our reform effort, and I think and we're going to continue to pay attention to the trends and what drives our population so that we can course correct as we go along. Want to hazard a guess at when you look at the huge decline in the jail population, to what extent you'd say that's driven by the change in the pretrial sort of population versus any sort of rough guesses as to the percentage you want to attribute to that, or? So I can say, as opposed to what we know and what we think,
yes.
We think that this has had a substantial impact. What we know is that, of the number of people who are in pretrial only, that's a 58% reduction from when we started at baseline. And now when they made up over a quarter of the population when we started, now it's under 20%. So we are seeing major fluctuations in that population.
So Keir, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, I would say one of the statistics that Rachel talked about was the sentence population was down.
Yes.
And that has to only come from smarter decisions on your pretrial side. Pretrial decision-making is the key to changing your system structure, because if you don't have time to weed out who should be in here and who shouldn't, you're going to treat everything the same. And when you're like a workman, you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So when we're now able to really make meaningful decisions on the front end, you see people that are released, that are out and working on their case, that are doing a lot of things to make their outcomes much better for them. So when people used to sit in pretrial, they would make decisions to plead guilty to things that maybe they did not do, but they had to make rational, real-life decisions in that moment. And I don't know how many people saw If Beale Street Could Talk, but if you see that, or if you haven't seen it, please go see it, because it's real. It's realistic about what happens in this system, and that narrative needs to be spread. What we have seen, too, when we have made more reasonable decisions on the front end, is that people who had charges, their cases were withdrawn, and they weren't subject to deciding whether or not to plead guilty. And that front-end analysis and that front-end practice could lead to what we see as mass probation. Those people that plead guilty to get out, where do they go? On probation. And that's the funnel. And so we have to stop that at the front end in order to have meaningful reform throughout the rest of the system.
So I'm going to turn to Jersey and Chicago in just a minute. Before I do, Kira, could you just, since we're talking about it now, the importance of representation sort of at that very initial phase that we're talking about. So we've talked about significant changes in the pretrial population and the sentence population, which you're saying is as a result of the pretrial work. But talk to us about what you see in terms of the role of indigent defense at that stage.
Yeah. So for us, we've really taken advantage of the opportunities to do more on the front end. And so we've changed our structure, where we used to wait until the back end to figure out what are the needs, what are the social issues, who is this person. We've now been able to meet people on that front end and do a lot more analysis to give to a decision maker as to whether or not we can make certain decisions that keep people out of this system.
And I'm just going to interrupt you. I know we say front end, back end kind of casually, but talk to me about a precise moment versus, so what do we mean precisely?
So front end, I'm talking about the moment of arrest.
Yep.
Right? Really trying to figure out who is this person, what opportunity do they have to be out in the community, and what can we do to address whatever social issues brought them here that are not criminogenic in nature, that are social or poverty related. And those things, people have been, in the city of Philadelphia, amazing programs, community has been stepping up and offering solutions and suggestions and better ways that the criminal justice system can respond to some of these issues. But counsel has to facilitate that. They have to have the time to understand who their client is. They have to have the time to speak with their client and advise their client so that we can start to move in a way that's beneficial for all of us. So there's a lot of jurisdictions that don't even have counsel at first appearance, that the person goes at this alone. A lot of biased decision-making is made because the full picture is not being presented at the time that a really important decision is made, whether or not to keep someone in jail or to release them to the community. And research has shown that when someone is in jail, they're more likely to get a jail sentence. When someone is out, they're more likely to work on their challenges, bring some information to a decision maker and say, hey, I can be out in this community. I'm now working on what brought me here. It's counsel that helps facilitate that. If you want to know who has mental health issues or deep-rooted, challenges, trauma that create the symptom of drug use, who's going to know that? Defense counsel. No other player in this system can gather that information at that front end with that credibility that would be given through counsel because of our confidential relationship to really facilitate meaningful opportunities for people and not wait until the end while they sat in jail and became more desperate to then say, hey, okay, now you're here, we're going to give you this conviction, we're going to give you probation, go do better, go rebuild. But I will say one last thing, since I get the chances to talk, right? We do have to understand the amount of biased decision-making that is made on there. We know fear and race drive a lot of decisions. And when you don't have counsel, when you don't have a full opportunity to explore who's before you, you start to make decisions based on the information that's before you in the Willie Horton effect. Yep. If I don't know something and this person does something, am I going to be in the paper? Am I going to be the one that's to blame? We have to stop that, and we have to make sure that we have more meaningful opportunities to explore better options.
Thank you. So we're going to come back to this in just a minute, but I want to go back to the numbers now in Jersey and Chicago. So again, major declines in your populations. Tell us what you know as to what's driving that and what you think may be happening where the absence of data is a little bit of a challenge. Jennifer, you want to start?
So there are some very key decision points when someone has an interaction with law enforcement. And in New Jersey, what we have is we have a framework where if a person receives a complaint summons, they are just given their complaint with a date to return to court. And if a person receives a complaint warrant, that has to be approved by a judicial officer, and that person is booked to a jail. So that's a really important point, where we allow our law enforcement officers, our prosecutors, and our judicial officers to see a risk assessment packet of information about the person's current charges, criminal history of convictions or failures to appear, and that information kind of drives the summons warrant decision. So we've seen an increase since 2014 to 2017. In 2014, we saw 54% of defendants leaving on a summons without being booked into the jail. In 2017, we saw 71% of defendants. So that has remained consistent for 2018. So, that is a very, very important point that's going to decide someone's next 24 to 48 hours. Another important thing in New Jersey is that first appearance, the arraignment, if you will, is that has to happen, and a release decision has to be made within 48 hours. In New Jersey, thanks to a lot of cooperation among our stakeholders, including our public defender, we have a statewide public defender's office in New Jersey. He has authority over all of his deputies in each of the 21 counties, and the public defender's office has committed to representing everyone provisionally at that first appearance. So every single person that comes through has an attorney there. Those decisions, release decisions, are made by and large within 24 hours. So 86% of those released within that first 48 are actually released within 24 hours. So that's a big push for us. The other important decision point in New Jersey is for those people who've been issued a warrant, a prosecutor can file a motion requesting their detention. And a judge cannot detain a person without the prosecutor filing a motion, and the prosecutor has to establish that there are no combination of release conditions that would assure public safety or the defendant's appearance in court. So it's quite a high standard, and for those, in addition to the risk assessment information at the summons warrant decision point, that risk assessment information is important at that decision point as well. So the entire packet is transparent. It's available to the prosecutor, the public defender, the defendant. They go through all of the information. They check all of the information, raise concerns to the judge. And I also supplement that with whatever other information they want to bring to the judge about the defendant particularly that might make a difference in that decision. So we're seeing a lot of information presented that drives that decision.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. Cara?
Yeah. So a few things to note. One is that we started in Cook County a stakeholder working group in 2014 that was presided over by one of our appellate court justices, Supreme Court justices. And that began the process of doing what I think is important in every jurisdiction, which is creating equilibrium. When I draw a picture of what I think is wrong with the criminal justice system, we have the judiciary up sort of on high, we have the jail, an unpopular thing to say maybe, the jail sort of in the gutter, and then the police and the prosecutor and the defense sort of milling around in the middle. I firmly believe, having served as executive director of the jail, that in order to accomplish reform, everyone has to buy into the fact that what happens in the courtroom is as important as what happens on the street and is as important as what happens in the jail. And to create equilibrium where everyone's respecting that we're all part of the same team, the same goal of accomplishing justice in a just way. The role of data is incredibly important. We, from the jail, began looking every year at how many people serve their entire ultimate prison sentence in the jail. You might think, how the heck could that happen? Happens all the time. So in 2017, we had 1,064 people who served their entire prison sentence in the jail. So when they were sentenced to a prison term, they were turned around. That was the label that we put on that population. So not only did that many people serve their entire prison sentence in the jail, they served an additional 223 years of custody time above and beyond what they needed to satisfy their prison sentence. So when we look at our state law in Illinois, which says that bond cannot be set at a level that is punitive, I would argue that it's per se punitive. If someone is sitting in jail, that does not have $100, $200, $500, $1,000 to bond out. So the role of data, as I think everyone would agree, is critically important. And in terms of what I know happened, is our chief judge in Cook County entered a general order that took effect on September 18th, 2017. And that order essentially directed bond court judges to follow the law, to set bonds at an amount that the defendant could pay. And from that moment on, while we had began to see trending downward, from that moment on, we saw a dramatic decline in our custodial population. And the last thing I'll say is, I really hazard to declare victory just based on a number. We still do a lot of heavy lifting, surfacing cases that need the attention of the prosecutor and the defense. We have a very large jurisdiction, so people can fall through the cracks easily, and I never want to forget the fact that we're talking about human beings' lives, 5,700 of them on a given day in the Cook County Jail. So we're always looking at people who have significant medical needs. We have a big focus on pregnant women that are in the jail. We continue to look at low-level offenders who just simply can't bond out and can't get a bond review hearing. So both a top-down approach from sort of big stakeholder work, but also continuing to need to do that bottom-up work of advocacy across the stakeholders.
I'm going to come back to Philly in just a minute, but Jennifer, help us. Cara was talking about money bond and the focus on following the law. New Jersey obviously changed the law significantly. Can you give people just a quick thumbnail sketch of what that change in the law is around money bond? And then we'd love to hear from our friends in Philadelphia. Sort of when you hear these changes in Chicago and New Jersey, how do those sort of align and not align with what's happening in Philadelphia?
So around the 2010 time frame, that we had a few jails that were under federal orders for overcrowding, et cetera. So between our jail wardens, and we have 21 jails, there's a wardens association that comes together and talks very openly about needs and services for defendants. Our Chief Justice led a committee. It included members from the Governor's Office, the legislature, prosecutor, public defenders, ACLU, Drug Policy Alliance, a lot of different stakeholders. And there was just a lot of momentum around looking at what's going on with our jail population. In 2013, we had a key jail population study that showed that there were a lot of people in the jail who could not afford a bond of $2,500 or less. So that was a significant time for us. So following the chief's recommendations that came out of the Joint Committee on Criminal Justice, in 2014, the legislature passed our Criminal Justice Reform Act. It was accompanied by a constitutional amendment that allows judges to detain somebody because they are a danger to the community, and that is a very significant change without setting a bond. So those things together really helped make a lot of change. So that was the law of the land, and this framework of a person who is issued a warrant and taken to a jail has to have a risk assessment done, has to have a pretrial recommendation, a release decision having to be made within 48 hours. That was all as of January 1st, 2017, based on that 2014 change. I would also say that we also took a hard look at all of our court rules, and our rules committee, which is made up of various stakeholders, really did a lot of hard work to make sure that our court rules would support the new law. So we did a lot of moving things in the direction of consistency within the 21 counties on how those first appearances were going to be handled, what was going to be presented at those first appearances, how detention hearings would be handled, what would happen after those detention hearings. And we also built a lot of systems around it. So we have technical applications that run our risk assessment, run our orders, et cetera, so that everybody has the same information at the same time. So there's a lot of change that happened since 2013 time frame all the way through now.
And the role of cash bail now in New Jersey?
It's very minimal. A judge could set a bond for someone, but only for failure to appear concerns, and it is very, very minimal. So in 2018, we only saw 102 bonds set, And many of those, at least 90 of those, were for violations of pretrial where the person had failed to appear.
And just for the purpose of comparison, 10 years ago, how many bonds would be set?
You know, I don't have a number,
Sure.
but it was just standard practice. And the way it worked in New Jersey is the police officer making the arrest would suggest the bond amount. So as you can imagine, they could figure out what a person could potentially afford. And so it started with that suggestion, and then a hearing about those who could not be bonded out or who could not afford their bail would happen afterwards, but there was not a consistent within 48 hours it had to happen.
Great.
So
So
big
let's-
changes.
Thanks, Jennifer. So now let's take all of that, what's happening nationally, and a lot of what you've been doing in Philadelphia, what's similar, what's different. Rachel, Kier, you want to both weigh in here?
Sure. So a lot of the collaboration that's been happening in Philadelphia has been organized through our Criminal Justice Advisory Board. So like other counties in Pennsylvania, Philadelphia has a Criminal Justice Advisory Board with representatives from all of the justice partner agencies locally. And this advisory board has been tracking the jail population and identifying ways to drive it down for many years. And so even when our jail population dipped over, 10,000 and there was serious overcrowding issues in Philadelphia, the Criminal Justice Advisory Board is working together to try and, begin making an impact and driving the population down. And so it was through that collaboration that the Safety and Justice Challenge was really came out of. So the partner agencies, joined together and looked closely at our data and identified ways that through long-term strategy that we could have an impact on the jail population. So, while we haven't had as much involvement locally from our state government partners, we have had to really develop a set of shared priorities and start implementation of things that, all of the partners here locally could agree on. And we feel, proud that we've had the success that we have with this local partnership.
And so I know, Kier, you've talked about the importance of representation early on and really weeding people, diverting people at the first opportunity. But just so that I'm clear, Rachel, what do you see as the one, two, three major policy changes that resulted from that collaboration? What's being done differently today?
Sure. So, to date, we've actually implemented 22 policy changes of the 30 in our reform plan, but some of the most impactful that early on that we've seen is our early bail review program. So this is a second look after 5 days for people who are held on low bail amounts, excluding certain charges. And this is a real an effort where, builds on the early representation that Kier was speaking about earlier, and her attorneys are able to interview an individual. The program is led by our municipal court, and the district attorney is also, present and making argument. And there's a real opportunity to have a more robust hearing after 5 days. And so that's had a huge impact on the work that we're doing. And one of those early kind of success moments that I think cemented the idea that, local partners working together could really make change happen in this way.
Thanks, Rachel. Kier?
So I just want to go back to what's different and what's the same. So
Yep.
we've been focused a lot on driving down the population, which is great, but we still need to create the system that doesn't allow it to happen again. And we still have that same structure. So we are in communication with our partners, and we are hoping to advance the needle more so to move towards what our sister state has done. And you're not in the shadow, you're actually like shining a light on what could be possible. In our pretrial decision-making, because if we don't have a system that looks at really people as releasable on that front end, and then has a system that has been driven by kind of random determinations of cash bail, then we'll never change. We have good people in a space right now that have some shared commonalities, but what about when we don't have people that share that? They can still use the structure as it is and drive the decisions that will put us right back, despite all this great work. So it's really great that we had this prison decline, but we really need to advance better and smarter legislation, rules changes around pretrial decision-making. And that's something that my office has worked on. We presented it to some of our partners, and we're really hoping that we're able to talk about that in some meaningful ways and see where our system could go. Because it's time. Right now, it's really time to stop looking at these things as normal, understanding and paying attention to the human cost of what we've been doing, and looking at how we can actually really make our justice system more equitable for many people. And so that's what I'm really, really critically, that's critical.
And so, Keir, when you talk about, and you want to jump in here, Rachel, in
Yeah.
a second, but just real quickly, Keir, follow-up. When you talk about durable, lasting sort of change, does that require is that state policy law change, or are there some things that you think that can just happen locally without the state?
So there's both. We've looked at a few ways to do this, and actually when we've worked 2 years to really look at this intricately. There are some state Supreme Court rules changes that needs to happen that will allow people to be summons to court versus sitting in jail waiting for that arraignment. If more people are summoned, that means we can have much more time to have an actual hearing, individualized hearing, to get more information and present more information. People can actually be present for that hearing where they're not now. They're at a remote location and they kind of zoom in via circuit TV. That's a very hard thing for a person to represent someone who's not physically there and they can't have a confidential conversation. I mean, that's fundamental fairness at its best, and if we can't achieve that, then we'll never make the best decisions that we can. So that's a rules change, but also state statute-wise, we still have cash bail on our statute, and so that becomes an option. However, the bail statute addresses the litany of decisions that need to happen before you get to that bail. So it's just making sure that we're looking at the state statute, interpreting it, and actually putting it to practice, that we're looking at what can a person afford, and then what are the conditions that are in our purview that can be made before we move to, okay, should bail be placed on a person?
Thank you. Rachel?
And I would just say that, locally we're not waiting for state statute to change. We are really thinking about what options are that are available to further change here in Philadelphia. And we're really committed to the goal of eliminating cash bail while both reducing our jail population, reducing racial and ethnic disparities in our jail, and preserving public safety. And I think that shared commitment among our justice partners is really, is the guiding vision for what we're hoping to do here. And so, it would be helpful to have state legislative change to drive this forward as well, but we're making progress here locally at the same time.
Great. A number of you have made reference to the use of tools that help gauge people's risk, and this is something that I know is tricky waters that a lot of places are navigating, and would love just to hear how you see some of this playing out in your jurisdiction. What are some of the what's the policy? What are some of the arguments that have played out? What are some of the things that you think you need to navigate going forward? If we could just take that, folks who are particularly interested in answering this question. Jennifer, I know this has been central to so much of what New Jersey has done. What are some of the tensions that are playing out?
Yeah. So I would say, I think because our risk assessment wasn't the only piece in our reform, it has not been as central or as controversial. And I would also say that the risk assessment that New Jersey uses, we've been very open with all of our stakeholders talking about what it's about and how it's used, et cetera. So, our statewide public defender has been all in on this risk assessment because for him, he can see what it is, what it measures, and our risk assessment, very importantly, and we use the public safety assessment, which was developed by the Laura and John Arnold Foundation, but it does not measure, it does not in any way take into account arrest history, it's only conviction history, and it takes into account failures to appear. So, it's 9 factors that everybody can see what went into each of those factors, how was it scored. We made a very deliberate decision in New Jersey to not just give our judge, our prosecutors, our public defenders, and our defendants the score. And some jurisdictions do that. We actually give the entire formula as a first page of our packet and all of the details of the entire court history that we have found along with that. So as you can imagine, defendants might be able to say, that failure to appear was due to a medical issue that I wasn't here. And so the pretrial services team will recalculate, where appropriate, the risk assessment. So it really allows everybody to see what's happening. Most importantly, I think, it allows everybody to see when somebody is low risk. So it takes away the, I'm judging who's in front of me, and it forces police officers, prosecutors, judges, public defenders to say, what is this person's criminal history? And if it's minimal, they are going to come up as a low-risk person. And then we have the framework around that to say a low-risk person should not be issued a summons unless the charges are very significant. So unless you're on a charge of murder, you're generally going to get a summons if you have a very limited criminal history. So that's breaking the cycle. The idea is not only that this person who is issued a summons can participate in their defense, but the person who's issued a summons does not make contact with other people in the jail, does not have that experience, does not have the loss of a job, perhaps the loss of home, perhaps the loss of family members. And so it's breaking an entire cycle, we think. And so when we talked about what we think earlier, one of the things that I think we will see many changes down the road 10 years from now. We're only at the 2-year mark now, but I think we will see changes down the road for those people who aren't coming into the system and the different road their lives might be taking as a result of that.
And we also want to weigh in on this point on risk assessment.
So I know for me, we've done a lot of research on risk assessments and understand how these things can exacerbate previous racially biased decision making. And so what we want to make sure is that if we are using a risk assessment, we all understand what it is. I know me personally, I want to shy away from a risk assessment tool. Some of the ones I've seen really do exacerbate disparities. Like if they calculate drug convictions. The war on drugs was a serious war in certain communities where they racked up a lot of convictions for possessions of marijuana. But now we're seeing a different response for our opioid crisis where people aren't getting those convictions, but they're getting treatment, which is what they should be getting. However, the people in the past still have those things on their record, which will raise their score or increase the likelihood that they have some risk. Additionally, we see risk assessments that talk about age at first arrest. Well, we have studies that show Black and brown children are 47% more likely to be arrested at a young age than non-Black and brown children. And so we just have to be careful not to exacerbate these racially biased decisions that have been baked into our criminal justice system for centuries and decades. And it's just, I said centuries, I don't know if it was even open centuries. Maybe that was like slavery or something, I don't know. But in any event, at least decades. I've only been born decades. But it's really, it's a nuance, right? But we want to be fair and we want to be open-minded. We want to be flexible. And if there are things that help us, guide us in better decision-making, that's great. But when they exacerbate the disproportionality, then that's something that I would pretty much oppose.
Go ahead, Rachel, sorry.
And I would also say that this is a really difficult question that, Philadelphia is trying to answer for its criminal justice system. And I think that the one thing that folks, not the one, but one of the things that folks agree on here is that, that any risk assessment is only one part of a healthy pretrial justice system. And that if an instrument, any instrument that will be used here will be both have an impact on reducing incarceration, reducing racial and ethnic disparities, and keeping our communities safe. And so those are kind of the three principles that guide the decision-making here about how risk assessment can be implemented.
Real quickly, Jennifer, then I'm going to turn to Cara, but go ahead.
I just want to say one of the things that the risk assessment has helped us do, and absolutely we have the same concerns that have been voiced here, and that's why we collect data and we've revalidated our risk assessment already once. We intend to do more work with it in 2019. But it has helped us confirm that of 135,000 defendants who came into contact and had complaints issued, 95,000 of them were low-risk defendants. And they were either issued a summons or they were released on their own recognizance without having to have any contact with our pretrial services officers. So that's a large chunk of people. So I think it dispels the myth that we have a lot of high-risk people circulating through the system. We don't. The other thing that is important to note is 15,000 of these people were low to moderate, where they had limited contact with pretrial. Once a month by phone, maybe once a month in person. They receive automated reminders. And then it's about 15,000 who were higher risk people. And those have a lot of contact with pretrial. A very small percentage of those might be on electronic monitoring or be on home detention. But the risk assessment has helped us to confirm that the large majority of people coming through are low-risk defendants. And that's important to know, I think, within any system.
Cara, Jennifer referred to the population now that's on the streets awaiting trial, also talked about different mechanisms of supervising that population. Talk to us a little bit about in Cook County, the populations now that you see under supervision in the community awaiting trial and how that's changed and some challenges that's presenting. And then I'm going to go one last question for the entire panel.
Okay, so first, I as to the risk assessment, I mean, I think it was also brought into Cook County, the Arnold Foundation tool. And our bail statute has 38 factors that a judge is supposed to consider when setting bail. And so I think that the implementation of the tool really sort of had some fits and starts, and I'm not sure that it was sort of the silver bullet solution that it was supposed to be. And my fear was that it relieved the judiciary from sort of evaluating that defendant that was before them in the way that the law had always required them to do. But to answer your question, Mike, and I alluded to this at the beginning, we run this very, very large community corrections program for pretrial. One of the very bizarre consequences of our bail reform is we have seen people being released on their own recognizance and their lawyers coming into court and motioning them to come onto our program so they get custody credit. One of those bizarre things I never would have imagined happening. But the program was always intended to be a low-level program for people who needed a little more support, more reminders, a little more supervision than someone on their own recognizance. And we have seen our program dramatically change to now it's being used for gun and violent offenders who we believe the judiciary is uncomfortable just releasing on their own recognizance or on their cash bond. So it presents challenges for us that are very unique. Our pretrial electronically monitored population is larger than the entire state parole electronically monitored population. So obviously, we have made great progress in Cook County, but I also think as we embark on reform, it's important to be raising your hand as a stakeholder and saying, hold on, this is a problem that we never talked about before, so that there's constant communication. You just don't declare victory and go home. This is something that we have to be invested in going forward and be willing to embrace whatever challenges that may flow from reform, such as a completely different community corrections program.
So I'm going to ask the panel one last question, but one thing I do want to recognize before we open up also for questions and answers is we've had a heavy emphasis here on risk, not to be conflated or confused with needs, right? And I think everybody in this audience on this panel recognizes the frequency with which we have presenting mental health and substance abuse issues, housing challenges, and how you have this really complicated cocktail of risk and needs and race and also what's right for that person and for public safety. So lots to sort out here that we haven't even scratched the surface on. But that said, what do you see as the biggest challenge or the one thing you most want to see happen in your system that you haven't gotten to yet over the next year or two? I'm going to ask each of you to answer that question, and then we're going to open it up to the audience for questions. So, Kira, you want to start?
Yeah, well, I'd like to see really narrowing some of the net that we have in terms of who we bring into our justice system. When we look at needs, we understand what drives behavior. And so when we are able to identify programmatic outlets that allow us to really address those needs much better, I'd like to see our system release that person to that social aspect, that they're really getting more hands-on help in there where their triggers are versus sitting in the jail cell. So I'd like to see some decision-making based on, okay, if this is truly a mental health issue, let's make sure that we're not using tax dollars on keeping them behind bars, but putting those into really good programs that make a difference for that mental health issue. So I'd like to just see a shift in understanding of how we deal with people.
Thank you, Rachel.
And along the same lines, I think what I would like to see is, increased alternatives for our law enforcement across the city in terms of how, how they make arrest decisions and their ability to link people to services in the community. We've implemented a few really exciting and innovative programs at the point of initial contact with law enforcement to deflect people away from the criminal justice system, particularly for those with behavioral health challenges, and also to improve the kind of screening and assessment process to identify people's behavioral health needs early on at the point of initial contact with law enforcement. And so what I would like to see is our ability to scale those programs, either our pre-booking diversion program, a co-responders where police are actually responding with behavioral health professionals when individuals are in crisis. I think that this is sort of a critical time to provide additional tools for law enforcement to be able to respond differently to people that they come into contact with on the street so that they never make it into the system in the first place.
Thanks, Rachel. Jennifer?
Yeah, I would absolutely echo everything that has been said. For New Jersey, it's been 2 years, and of our 135,000 defendants who came through, only 6% ended up detained. But there are a lot of people who were released and those who are detained that have so many needs, and we need to address those. We are nowhere near declaring victory. We have to do a lot of work surrounding domestic violence within our state. We have to do a lot of looks at disparity, continually looking at our entire process throughout to see where are the points that people are not being treated the same and how can those be resolved. And some of those are within the courts and some of those are beyond the courts, but it's keeping our stakeholders together talking to make sure that all of those points are being addressed.
Jennifer Carr?
Yeah, I would also agree with everyone's comments. I don't know how many people in the audience have ever tried to get someone, loved one, into mental health or substance use treatment. I have both. It's virtually impossible. It's very expensive. The systems are unwieldy. In the Cook County Jail, and I'm sure in other jurisdictions, we provide very, very high quality substance use programming and mental health programming. But with the opiate crisis that I know we're all dealing with, we have people that get great services when they're in the jail, and I feel like I'm betraying my soul when I'm saying that. But sometimes I look at people that are suffering with a 5, 7, 8 year struggle with heroin, and they're asking to be put into the program rather than being released from the jail because it's there, we can get them in, we can get them started on medically assisted treatment, and we can give them a shot. So I think that the criminal justice system is at this really exciting place of meeting needs while shedding the decades of unjust incarceration that has occurred. So.
Great. Well, I have a lot more questions I want to ask the panel, but we know you have questions, so we're going to open it up to you now for questions you have for the group. Hands going up. Claire, go ahead.
Hi, Claire Shubik-Richards from the Prison Society. So obviously jail population is stock, who's coming in, and flow, how long people are staying and when they're going out. So I'd love it if both the Philadelphia contingent and also our colleagues from New Jersey and Chicago could talk about how long people are staying and the court process. One of the things that struck me studying the Philadelphia jail population now over 10 years ago was that 75% of defendants still had their cases open after 3 months. And that meant very long stays for those people that were detained, but that also meant for those people that were out, there were constant opportunities for them to mess up and end up detained. There were so many court hearings that it was very easy to miss one and then have a warrant, or there were so many opportunities for if you got into an interaction with law enforcement and it was revealed that you had an open case, for that to then impact whether in that new interaction you would end up detained, which is one concern that I have about increasing ROR in Philadelphia, is that with our court and also services, pretrial services, is with our court process so long, it's just much more cumbersome than in a jurisdiction with a shorter court process. So my data is old. For the Philly folks, is it still true that 75% of cases are open after 3 months? And for the folks from other jurisdictions, how long is your court process?
So I can't speak to that specific statistic, but what I do know is that since we've started the reform effort, we've identified both improving case processing times as one of our strategies, and we've actually seen a 23% reduction in length of stay at the time of discharge for people in Philadelphia. So there is more work to do, and we're looking specifically at identifying those who are spending long amounts of time in custody and trying to identify ways for both individual cases and holistically as a system to try and address those issues. But it is something we recognize that, long lengths of stay is a huge issue in our system.
Just so that I'm clear, and I want to come to Kieran in a second, sure. The distinction between the length of stay for a pretrial detainee versus the length of case processing, and your stat was on the length of stay for pretrial detainee has shortened. The case processing thing is another sort of a question to come back to.
That statistic is specific to the length of stay for all individuals in our county jails. So it's not specific to pretrial,
okay.
But we do also look at lengths of stay by confinement category, as I mentioned earlier, to figure out sort of where we're making progress.
No, and this is just where it gets really interesting for the data nerds, I think, in the audience, right? Where you're talking about many different categories here, right? Mm-hmm. We're talking about our overall jail population, how long do they stay on average? Then you try to cut it just by our pretrial population, how long do they stay on average? Not to be confused with just how long does a case stay open while you're in the community and the overall case processing time. 3 very important data points. Kier, you wanted to jump in here?
Yeah, I want to speak specifically to Claire's question in terms of when people are out, how long their opportunities to mess up. That is something that we've been really, really concerned about as well. As you know, we understand how easy it is to go right back. And so what we had to do, and we will own this to the defender side, we had to look at our own internal practices and structures. We had a horizontal model of representation, which may have caused people who had to pick up that case each time they had a new hearing to ask for a continuance or delay that process. So we have restructured our felony case to vertical representation, so the same person has the same case throughout, which has shown us to be much more expeditious in getting that case together. Also, we've been really intricately involved with the community to let them know what's called Know Your Systems training. So people know what they're getting ready to go through to the long haul. I don't think many people knew that if you got arrested on one felony case, you have about 8 different hearings if everything goes right. And if not, it could be 14 to 16 different hearings. So when we're talking about FTA history, just thinking about all the time someone has to take off work and go to court, they could miss one. You're right. And then it doesn't matter because you've had your privilege of being out and you ruined it. So community has stepped up in advance, Know Your Systems, and have helped people understand when they could not make it and how to be proactive about that not just not showing up, but call your defender, call your lawyer, whoever that is, and allow them to accept service for you so we can move this along. And they've been holding people accountable to reach their obligations far better than we could.
And what a great example, too, of the role of indigent defense in having an impact just on case processing times, which is going to be of interest to everybody across the system, regardless of your perspective. So, quick tour of New Jersey and Chicago with respect to this question.
Yeah, I will say that in New Jersey, our case processing times have never been short. And we do also have, there are so many pieces to our reform, and one of them, a significant one, is the speedy trial component that really puts a lot of very significant and strict structure around the process. I will say that I don't have the case processing times stats with me, but I will say that for comparable periods of time in 2014, defendants spent an average of 62 days in the jail awaiting trial, and in 2017, that dropped to 37. So we have a lot more people out in general, and the time for black defendants was reduced to 10, and the time for white defendants reduced to 5. The other thing I will say is that when we really took a hard look at failures to appear and looked at all the events that a defendant has to attend in general, we do find that defendants in 2014 and 2017 actually appear at a very high rate. So in 2014, the rate was 92%, and in 2017, it was 89%. So looking at all of their requirements, we also have made some changes to when a judge might issue a bench warrant for failure to appear and instead do a notification for that first time. So that has helped along with notices. But we are reducing our time to disposition. It's just that we would like to be more aggressive about it and reduce it even further.
Cara, real quick, I don't want to answer more
very,
questions.
very quickly, it's sort of the bane of our existence in the Cook County Jail. I get concerned about length of stay stats because it factors in someone who spends one or 2 days in the jail, as well as someone who, we have defendants in our jail awaiting murder who have been there for 7, 8, 9, and even one person 10 years awaiting trial. So it's something that we are very, very concerned about. Our judiciary and our court clerk are not subject to they have no Open Records Act responsibility, so it makes getting at the data pretty tricky, but it is something that Sheriff Dart is very, very concerned and focused on.
Other questions? Yes, right back.
Frank Cervone, Support Center for Child Advocates. The traditional pushback, or one of the pushbacks, both on early release and on sentencing reform in general, is community safety. Have Chicago or New Jersey done any study on whether we are more or less safe, and have you found any good news or bad news on the question?
So we just recently in New Jersey released an annual report on criminal justice reform, year 2, and it includes a significant research study where we looked at rearrests, particularly as a community safety point, and we found that defendants really don't get rearrested at any greater rate now that we have more defendants who are released. So defendants released under the new system are no more likely. Under the monetary bail system, 12.7% of defendants were released or charged with a new indictable offense. That doesn't count what you would call misdemeanors here. And in 2017, it was 13.7%. And the misdemeanor rate for us is very similar. There's like a 2 percentage point difference, and they're both in the teens as well. So we have not seen community safety compromised. Not that we have not seen defendants who have reoffended, and some of those offenses are serious, and we don't take that lightly. However, the crime statistics we are seeing as reported in New Jersey by our state police has not shown an increase in crime as a result of the changes that we've made over the past few years.
Jennifer, appreciate the question. Just to, what's the 30-second soundbite as to why these changes were good for public safety?
Because I think we're identifying the people who are low risk and who can be safely in the community. We've identified that's actually a high percentage of the population. And most importantly, someone who is high risk, who's been charged with a very serious crime, if they have the means, they can't just bail themselves out anymore. I mean, that was the way it was in New Jersey. People who had the means could be dangerous. If they had the money, they were out on the street. That is no longer the case.
Question right here. Yes, ma'am.
Adult probation and parole. I so appreciate you when you talk about being able to identify low-risk offenders. But I believe in New Jersey you said with your reduction in population, you also reduced the disparity. Was I correct in hearing that?
We have reduced disparity in some areas, and this is going to be a subject of our 2019 research. So looking for disparity at all the different points of complaint, arrest, detention, et cetera, is a project that we have more to do on. But in terms of the length of stay, we have reduced disparity.
Can you tell me how you did that? Because that is a major focus here in Philadelphia, and we're very concerned with that because, as you've heard from our esteemed panel, we've had great reduction in numbers, but no reduction in disparity. And we really want to find out how to do that and do that effectively.
Okay. So I will say that one of the things that challenges us is that the makeup, even though the jail population has decreased for 3 main areas that we're talking about, the makeup, the overall percentage is still the same. So I don't want to give the impression that we've solved it because we're not there. But we are seeing that people are staying in the jail for, if they're going at all, for a lot shorter period of time, and that has resulted in an impact for all the different groups that we're looking at. So I think that's why we're seeing the length of stay going down so significantly is what has been the good result all across the board.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
Stephen Belenko, professor at criminal justice at Temple University. My first job was at the Vera Institute of Justice, which was the birthplace of bail reform. I don't want to say when that was, but it was a while back. So I'm getting a little feeling of deja vu all over again, because bail reform and pretrial services expansion, use of ROR, were issues that we thought were solved in the 70s and 80s. Kentucky did away with money bail in the 80s, and here we are again, and it's just wonderful reform efforts going on. That's really encouraging. But Kara mentioned the guarding against complacency. So my question is, I fear that we're just a couple of notorious crimes away, or shifts in political winds, and then never underestimate the power of the bail bond industry from having these reforms pulled away. So my question is, what can we do to really institutionalize these reforms and inoculate them against political trends, 5, 10 years from now, so they're not, in 20 years, we're not talking again about bail reform and use of all, increasing all these great reforms.
So I'm going to come back to Philadelphia first, and then go to Chicago on this one. We were talking earlier about some durable changes, and you talked about some of the local policy changes, state policy changes. Other things that you think that sort of could be done that would really make this long-lasting?
I think the main thing we need to do is engage community differently. I mean, because if people start to really understand what we're talking about, and the narrative is not driven by the fear of the highest crime or the worst crime, then people, no matter what politics or leaders are in place, people know what's making a difference. And so that's where we've seen a huge understanding of what opportunities we have by bringing community, not just educating them, but being educated by them, really bringing them into the solution fold. They hold people more accountable than anyone else, because they say, if you don't pay it forward, then if something happens to me or my family member, we're going to get the same treatment that we got before. So people are advancing better understandings of where our opportunities are to make long-lasting change, so that things don't just shift like this because the one bad thing happened.
So Karen, in your dream world 5 years from now, how are communities and elected officials talking about this issue that sort of reflects that?
Communities are coming up with their own solutions to some of their problems in their communities, and presenting it to decision makers to say, hey, this is what we think should happen here. I mean, I think community has never really been brought in. Philadelphia has been great with bringing community into the fold for solution-based decisions. And they have been so creative and so great and so knowledgeable about what's missing in their own community, that if they only had this, it could alleviate this. That have been receptive to our DA. Our DA has been very receptive to community solutions. He's actually really looking into restorative justice models, which is what we should be doing, because many people want something different than what the criminal justice system thinks they should have. And so it's great to have a DA at this moment doing that. That's why we got to bring it in and measure it, see how it works, because who knows what the next DA or when the next DA will come in, what their political mindset will be.
Cara, this stuff is, I'm sorry, did you want to jump in, Rachel?
Yeah, sure. I couldn't agree more that bringing community more deeply into the criminal justice reform work is critically important, and that's been another major priority of the next phase of our Safety and Justice Challenge work. The other thing I would add is that, and I may sound like a broken record here, but the collaboration between all the partners is critical to sustaining the work. We've seen leadership change in almost every partner agency in Philadelphia since we started the reform work, but because everybody is kind of brought to the table and working together, no one leadership change at any given time can derail the effort.
Thank you. Cara, white hot in Chicago, these issues in Cook County. What do you think it's going to take for this to be really durable, long-lasting?
Well, I feel like we're well on our way to being there. As Rachel mentioned, just last night I sent an email to the prosecutor's office asking for consideration in a bond hearing today based on someone being a victim in a case of ours. There's an unprecedented level of engagement and dialogue among the stakeholders, I think recognizing that we are a system. We are not in silos. Our state legislature also has committees, or I guess they're subcommittees, that evaluate all criminal justice bills to stop what was very popular for many, many years, which is the tough on crime, tough on crime, tough on crime, that is one of the levers that got us in the place that we are. So I feel pretty comfortable in Cook County, which might sound crazy because we still have a ton of work ahead of us on a variety of issues, some of which are in the media all the time. But I think that I feel pretty good that we have elected officials in place, we have systems that are working in the same direction, and that we will not return to the times of the past.
Time for maybe one more question. Terry, go ahead.
Hi, Terry Schuster from the Pew Charitable Trusts. I wanted to ask about, a lot of places around the country have good policies on the books. If they got good constitutional provisions, they got good laws, and part of the problem there is just the judicial culture is this is how we do things, or this is how we've always done them in my career, or the law enforcement culture is this is how we do things, we're not going to change how we do things. What have you seen, or what do you think it takes to bring about judicial culture change, law enforcement culture change?
Car, you want?
Yeah, I would like just to mention, the role of a bail review hearing, to your point. We had a horizontal system. We had one set of stakeholders at bond court, one set of stakeholders in preliminary hearing, and then another set of stakeholders in the trial courtrooms. So it was impossible for someone to get a bail review because courtrooms 2 and 3 said, not my job. So there's a law in the books now that requires a bond review to happen within 7 days if someone is not released. It has been slow to happen because it takes a change in culture and belief among the different stakeholders and basically shedding the thought process of, well, that's not my job, that's not something I've ever had to do before. Well, now it is. Someone's custodial status should matter in courtroom 1, 2, and 3 throughout the system. So your point is an excellent one, that even though you have things that might look good on the books, it takes the stakeholders to really keep pushing until they're realized. But, if we can do it in Cook County, you can do it anywhere. So, yeah.
Can I just say, I would say, I think it takes good leadership. I've seen, especially in Harris County, some of the judges were at the forefront of these, and then when we go to other conversations like this, there are judges that are advancing now better things. Now that they know better, they do better. And I've seen just a person's mindset change that trajectory of a system. And so I can't speak for everyone, but if you have a person that is understanding enough and really introspective as to what am I doing, and I thought I was doing the right thing. I didn't think our own federal judge, Ted McKee, has been a major spokesperson for looking at probation reform. And this is a judge that now has a platform, has a balance, and has an understanding and a level of trust that is able to step out and say, hey, you know what? We may need to rethink what we're doing and do it differently. So I've seen that change a culture. Law is very traditional, and sometimes we don't always catch up to the societal advancements. But I think when you have leadership, strong leadership, you can.
Okay, that brings us to time. I'm going to ask our other panelists to start making their way to the stage. But as they do, what an incredible discussion, and I'm dying to ask you a million more questions, but we've run out of time. Please join me in thanking our terrific panelists. Thank you, Kier. Yeah, thank you. So I've been told to do this as seamlessly as possible, so we'll see if I can keep everybody still at their seats while bringing our next group up. Good luck with that, right? So our next panel... Our next panel has representatives of, again, 3 great metropolitan areas. You want to keep going? You want? Yeah. All right. It's clear we need to take a quick, we'll take 3 minutes as everybody gets settled again, and then we'll restart the next panel. It seemed a little bit optimistic that we would. Well, as promised, we're going to shift gears now into our second panel. And we really had a heavy emphasis. We always said this was going to be about what's happening in local government. And our first focus was what really happens in the arrests through the booking and the effects on jail population. Now we're going to focus on really the larger supervision, correctional supervision population, which are those people who are under community supervision. For the purposes of this panel, we're going to be focused on probation primarily. But when we talk about community corrections, we're of course talking about not just probation, but also parole supervision. And I think a fact lost on most of the general public, maybe just until recently, is that when we talk about people under correctional supervision, we always tend to focus on prison and jail populations. But really, where the correctional system gets really, really big is when we start talking about parole and probation. So on any given day, we're talking about 4.5 million adults who are under community supervision in any given day. And you go to some states, and the ratios are really extraordinary, where you literally get under 1 in 20 adults in some places who are under correctional supervision on any given day. And you get into particular neighborhoods and in particular demographics, and it becomes even more concentrated. Really, any strategy that anybody's going to have to think about their prison and jail population, where corrections administrators will tell you a key driver of their prison and jail population are people who have violated probation and parole their conditions of their parole and probation, oftentimes not by necessarily committing a new crime, but by breaking a condition of their parole or probation supervision. We will also hear from our friends in community corrections that any strategy to deal with people who are suffering from addiction, mental illness, at risk of overdosing, has to take into account the role of community supervision. It is really a linchpin of so many different sort of systems that we talk about, and certainly a key element of any public safety strategy. So with that, we're thrilled to have with us the representatives of 3 of the largest general systems in the country, 2 who actually administer probation. We have Commissioner Ana Bermudez from New York City, who runs the probation department there, Teresa May, who runs the probation department in Harris County, and we also have Bob Listenby, a good friend, who has worn many hats, and really excited to see as a key top leader, I'm going to get your title here right, the first assistant district attorney in the office of the DA here in Philly. If you look at their bios, you'll see really long, impressive histories with lots of knowledge, not only around correctional systems, law enforcement, but also youth and other kinds of special populations. So please join me in welcoming our terrific panel. Okay, so same rules apply. We're going to have an interactive conversation. We're going to start with a couple data points, and then we'll ask a few more questions, and then we'll bring in the audience. So let me just start by some of the trends that you're seeing in your system. In particular, if you can just give us a snapshot of how many people are under supervision in your jurisdiction, and what you see as some major changes that's been going on, and any theories as to sort of why. Commissioner, you want to start? And by the way, if you don't mind, much as I did with the same last panel, I'm going to be using first names. I know we got commissioners, chiefs, and all those kinds of things. So Anna, take it away.
Okay. Thank you for having me, first of all, and thank for all of you to be being here so early in the morning. So in New York City, the trend we've been seeing has been a reduction in both arrests, and I tend to say arrest rather than crime because, you know, it's really what's driving a lot of the system is police practices. So police practices have changed enough in New York City that fewer people are getting arrested, and therefore fewer people coming into the system. 10 years ago, 12 years ago, we were touching about 50,000 cases in the Department of Probation, a city of 8 million. And now we are down to about 27,000. People, younger people, even fewer younger people. In New York, I oversee juvenile and adult probation. So those have been the sort of numeric trends, if you will. We have pretty much, I mean, it's less than 0.1% of filings of violations of probation on a purely technical matter. If somebody is not a public safety concern, we need to keep trying to find other ways of dealing with the issues that are getting in the way of exiting the system or succeeding, in life. And therefore, so any violations, when we see violations of probation in New York City, 9 out of 10 times, it's because of a new crime that is indictable, and it's not just jumping the turnstile. And so, or marijuana or anything like that. So that's kind of like the numeric trend and a sort of change in philosophy a little bit, although that had been started by some of my predecessors. And then, a move towards more evidence-based practices and sort of, I would put it the how and the where probation is done. We've moved into communities a lot more. My juvenile people have a Remove the Desk campaign at the moment. And also, we've also been redefining the role of the probation officer, which I think we'll get into a little later. So I'm going to save that piece too.
Key data points to take home is that there's fewer people under probation supervision today than there were.
Yeah.
And also the percentage of people going back to jail or prison on a technical violation has dropped dramatically in recent years.
Absolutely.
So key takeaways in New York City. Harris County, Houston.
So in Harris County, we have about 36,000 active probation cases right now. One of the big trends that we've seen, especially over the last couple of years, we've gone from about 13,000 people on some kind of supervision for low-level misdemeanors, or misdemeanor in general crimes, to right now it's just under 8,000, which is a really substantial drop. And that's been a collaborative effort with multiple stakeholders and a district attorney that's been very, very focused on not bringing people into the system who don't belong. The other thing, we have seen reductions in technical revocations and revocations in general. We believe that good interventions, treating people as individuals, doing good individualized assessments of needs can actually impact all of those things. The focus has really shifted, and we'll talk more, I think, about culture, but from, failure to success. How can we create more and more success?
So we're going to come back to that point. I'm just going to try and keep going through the data, and then we'll come back to this point around culture. So Bob, in Philadelphia, what are you seeing generally with some of the numbers around probation?
Well, it's my understanding. Again, I'm not with the probation department,
Correct.
but instead with the district attorney's office. First of all, when Larry Krasner was elected, he was elected on a platform focusing on reducing the criminal impact or the impact of the criminal justice system on people engaged in it just because they are in poverty. The goal was to ensure that low-level offenses were no longer brought into the criminal justice system, decline in prosecuting marijuana, no bail for 26 low-level offenses. But the probation population has been hovering around 40,000. It's down from 55,000, I'm told, but I don't know the exact date that started. Larry Krasner's goal is to reduce that number of people on probation to about 20,000 at this point, as soon as possible. And I think what we're bringing to the discussion is a sense of urgency and a sense of action-oriented discussions, rather than a willingness to debate these issues for long periods of time.
So as we talk about the probation system and different kinds of strategies and how important those systems are, one of the things that's always surprised me is how hard it is to get good data around probation. And I'm wondering if our two probation administrators could just sort of speak to some of the frustrations, or what's some of the data points that you don't have that you wish you had, and why is this stuff so hard to generate? Teresa, you want to start?
Well, I am a licensed psychologist and a researcher by background, and somehow ended up being a probation director, which has been a good thing. So the data were not exactly in a format that is friendly to research, to answer questions quickly. Researchers clearly didn't build the system, and in some situations, neither did practitioners. So, but I will tell you that, as a researcher, someone that is running a large probation department based on success, data is absolutely essential, and I will not let that be a barrier, but it takes a lot. takes a lot of work to transform
What's an
data.
example of something that you would think probation administrators would have at their fingertips, but actually requires a pretty complicated study?
Actually really getting good data day-to-day on who is pending, who's in jail. It's in Harris County, obviously, there's a lot of people moving. And our system is working to do that more and more, but looking more closely at who's in jail. Also, looking at some of the disposition data, regular disposition. So who's coming our way, who's not, what kind of cases are pending. On probation, I feel like we've come a long ways. We have dashboards, we're monitoring the key data points. One of the big changes we had to make, though, was getting good racial and ethnic data on our population. That's something that needed to be more uniform across the system. And that's a data point that should have been at fingertips and has been a challenge.
Thank you. Anna?
Even though I'm not a researcher by profession, I'm a total data geek. So data is really important to me. And in fact, one of our agency drivers is that all the leadership has to be able to manage through data, right?
Yes.
And we have a pretty good, like Teresa's system in Harris County. We have a very good database system for what we do, that allows me to look at a number of things fairly quickly. Although I'm going to talk about one piece of this work that's difficult data-wise. But when they leave our system, right? So managing, like when somebody's in court, how we can influence something that is happening, right? So somebody gets rearrested on a misdemeanor case or a felony case, it doesn't matter. Like finding out and having the resources also to be a presence in that case with all the legal, I'm a lawyer and I keep forgetting all the things that you're not supposed to do in a new case to alert the judge that, the person's been on probation. But if there's ways that you can coordinate better so that the outcome of the new case can be influenced by what strides the person has been doing on probation, right? Things like that get really difficult. And also coordinating data with the, DA's office. Thankfully now, a lot of our DAs are really very much on board to do secondary diversion, right? So maybe they won't prosecute certain cases of somebody on probation if we can, let's say, increase their supervision or do some other thing that then they can hold that at bay while something else is happening on probation, things like that. So I think that sort of coordination of data can become difficult. We don't oversee the jails in New York City. There's a whole different department of Corrections oversees the jails. So also being able to have that communication, we're now developing some data sharing systems that we can have. Two things are hard with data and probation. As we are doing a change in culture, right, and let's say as we're trying to focus more on success rather than absence of problems, how do you measure that, right? Data systems are not equipped to do that necessarily. How do you measure somebody's success other than that they've completed probation, completed probation? Does that make them prepared for the world of work? Does that make, how do you measure well-being if that's what part of the measures of success, of probation, not just completing, not just spending the time? So that's one issue. The other issue is that we can never do a real, when people talk about rates of rearrests among people on probation or so even success rates of probation, you're looking at, of closed cases, how many were successful. It's not a cohort analysis because people are on probation 5 years, 4 years, whatever. So you can't really, even assessing your success rate, if you will, your successful completion rate is not a true successful completion rate because a cohort analysis cannot happen until 5, 10 years from, whatever. So even the data we put out there does not necessarily reflect the performance of the department.
So, we're going to come back to this issue of a system historically that's focused on its failures rather than its successes and how to measure that. Bob, from a law enforcement DA perspective, what typically are the kind of data that, those agencies would love to see around probation? What's hard to get?
First, let me, Michael, let me draw a contrast. New York has, you say, 27,000 people under supervision,
Yeah.
8 million population. Harris County has a population of about, I believe, 4 million. Is that about right?
Close to 5. Yeah.
5 million. Philadelphia has a population of 1.6 million, and we have the largest probation population here, about 40,000. You have about 37,000 or so. So one of the things we've been focused on is reducing the numbers here. As the chief law enforcement officer of Philadelphia County, the DA would like to have access to the same kind of data that you have in New York, same kind of data that you have in Harris County, so that we can evaluate new kinds of programs that we might establish. There might be a secondary diversion program. There might be a look at filing motions to reduce the probation population in large numbers for those people who've been successful for 4, 5, 6 years, depending upon the standards set by each individual judge that will be reviewing that. But we don't have access to that data just yet. We've asked for it, and we hope to get it soon so that we can get involved in the process more in-depthly. We do not have access at the moment.
Okay, so let's turn to what is the purpose of probation, because that's an answer that actually has been changing depending on who you ask. So I would love for each of you to say, what do you think the purpose of probation is? And then we're going to come back and we're going to say, what do you think other people in your county say the purpose of probation is? So let's just go down the line again. Anna, what do you say the purpose of probation is? And if you can keep it real short, and then we're going to do a contrast.
Yes, in preparing for this, I try to, because our mission, our vision statement is so long, it's ridiculous. But so we have two tagline, like a double tagline that I think encapsulates this: strengthening communities and changing lives. And so it's basically to keep people on probation out of safely in the community, right? As they address some of the factors or some of the circumstances that led to their involvement in the system, right?
So one more time, the tagline was?
The tagline is strengthening communities and changing lives.
Okay, so let's go. Teresa, what do you see the purpose of probation?
For me, we are looking at long-term sustainable change. And changing lives, same kind of thing. That is something we talk about quite a bit. And, there's a number of factors that I won't go into in a short answer. But it's critical that you look for someone to have a lasting change that's going to go way beyond any kind of supervision, and a successful way. And restoring communities and restoring people to their communities, because it's not a person on probation, it's a family on probation.
Great. Bob, how would you?
I would say restoring communities and protecting communities along with strengthening individuals.
Okay, so now I'm going to go interview police, the mayor, or the county commissioners, and I'm going to say to them, what do you see as the purpose of probation? What kind of answers are they going to give? And then we'll do a third version of what will the community tell us.
Okay. A lot of people might say, we don't know. It's not really clear to us what they do, because a lot of people just see the failures, and the police can point to several people on probation who got rearrested, or they arrested and keep arresting and whatever. And so I don't think there's a clear understanding of what we do, and same with other stakeholders even. So we are actually trying to think of many campaign to really be able to talk about it in a meaningful way and to people about probation. Probation used to be like, well, what we do when we don't know really what to do. We know we don't want to send them to jail, to prison, but we don't really know what else to do. This looks pretty serious, so boom, here you go. As opposed to from an understanding that we know that probation is going to hold this individual accountable, that they will work on, behavior change as needed and or connections to communities, et cetera. So I don't think they would be well versed.
So two sets of answers, right? One, maybe they don't know, period. And then second, if they do, it's that system that we use when we can't figure out what else we're going to use.
Yeah, I think that's basically.
Okay. Teresa, similar answer in Harris County?
We have 100 police departments, and law enforcement, depending on what's going on in a given day, you might hear certain descriptions of probation, everything from, it's a slap on the wrist
right,
to, I have no idea what y'all do. So I think that it is very important that we continue, as Anna said, to educate, because it isn't just law enforcement.
Right.
There really is a lack of understanding among many people as to what we do, and part of it is probation has evolved over time. You know, we're not just monitoring conditions, we're doing assessments, interventions, and changing behavior. So it swings the pendulum, and it's one of many reasons I'm happy that the Pew Charitable Trust are really looking at community supervision. It's overdue.
Great. Bob, again, not community, yet government stakeholders, I asked them, what does probation do? What do you think you hear?
Well, I think if I were looking and talking to the mayor and his people, since the mayor has the police department under supervision, also behavioral health under supervision, and then the health department, and if I were talking primarily to the law enforcement side, they would say protecting the community against violent offenders and people who are engaged in sex offenses and particularly family violence kinds of issues. But also the police come in contact with people who have significant mental health issues and also people who have significant substance abuse disorders. So the police would want to be able to have probation address all those different types of issues with comprehensive programs within the probation department that could address those issues. So you would be there to help everybody in every way you could.
And that's the ideal answer, or that's what
I think I talk to police officers frequently, and they tell me that's what they're trying to do. And I see them in the mornings when they're dealing with the homeless populations, trying to address their issues. They're not really trying to arrest everybody. They're trying to keep the community kind of safe in the areas where they're interacting with the homeless populations and with the people who have significant mental health issues, people who have substance abuse disorders. So they see it all. They know that you need more than just the strong arm of the law. Right. And I see them doing it all the time. I think they would give us that answer.
So now let's go to the communities where the rates of supervision are the highest. You know, what would you say sort of are the way that those, and I know we're talking about something as if it's a monolithic group, right? But when you're out there and you're meeting with representatives of the community where rates of supervision are high, talk to me a little bit about how they view probation the way you want them to view probation.
Well, the way they used to view probation was that it was set up to keep people in the system, to be, you know, with that 24,000 conditions of probation, how could you, you know, ever not, violate a condition of probation? And so in New York City, we've done a ton of work in changing that perspective with the community in terms of our community offices called NEONs, the Neighborhood Opportunity Networks, programming that is open to the community. We have community stakeholders in decision-making positions in our community offices, in our NEONs. And so it is very important to us for the community to see us as a resource, to see probation as a stage of opportunity rather than in the system or the stage of opportunity for people to really create. And the other tagline that we have is that when you come to probation, you're here to create a new now for yourself. Whether you're a juvenile or an adult, doesn't matter, but to really think through where you are, where you've been, where you need to go, and we will try to work with you to get you there, right? And that somebody who's on probation ends up in a better place than when they started. And so that whole community connection is really important to us, and we do a lot of work in the community.
Teresa?
And I would say that is evolving. Definitely the first answer many people will come back with is it's a setup to fail. And, there are many people in the community that have been on supervision, at a time when things were just monitoring rules and violating people and sending them to prison. And that perception is completely understandable. Now, that's been evolving, though. We've been working very hard, as Anna mentioned, to, leave people better than they started, to help meet their needs, to actually work directly with families and communities to get a person where they need, get the services they need. So we have heard more and more from our communities in terms of, thanking us, families thanking us for saving their loved ones' lives. And that's, serious drug addiction and serious mental health issues. It's about restoring people. And it's interesting, we actually have a Facebook page where we've been letting, a lot of the stories that get our letters that get written to our probation officers from our clients that are just, for me, really important, because you do hear a lot more about the case that didn't go right. And people are going in depth thanking their probation officer or a family member writing a probation officer for literally changing their lives. And it's interesting, a lot of people that are now going to graduate from probation and move on with their lives are noting the contrast.
Bob, you want to weigh in on this too?
Yes, I think in Philadelphia, I can't tell you exactly what people on probation are thinking, but I think a lot of folks probably are thinking that it's been a system that's been very oppressive, particularly of minorities and particularly of African American men. One of the most difficult scenes to watch in Philadelphia had been the previous location for the probation department office, which is like a cattle call in Center City with hundreds of men lined up every day outside the building, rain or shine, snow, it didn't matter. They were lined up to go in and meet their probation officers. That was a horrible scene. It's changed. We have a new probation office and a new chief probation officer. And there's an evolving vision. One of the parts of that vision is a neighborhood resource center that's supposed to have lots of resources, mental health resources, job resources, that's designed for this new evolving view of probation. And we're hoping, many of us who are participating in the system, that new evolving view will provide probationers an opportunity to get jobs, to get the kind of resources they need to evolve in their communities so that they won't have to be down here in this embarrassing kind of situation in Center City. Also, running the risk of losing their jobs and losing opportunities for education and disrupting their families. Probation has really been a bane on the existence of a lot of folks, and I think it needs to change dramatically in terms of its view of its individuals. We've invited people from New York. This is, I think, Anna's third visit I've seen in the last several months, and so we're trying to learn from New York a lot of the ideas that they've been expressing, and there's a sort of an evolving view, and those of us who are close to it are waiting to see if it evolves in the right direction and quickly enough.
So great. So we've gone through what we want probation to be, some of the challenges that we run into with other stakeholders and where things are now. Probably, I think everybody would agree, though, it starts from within, right? It starts from within the organization, the agency. And I think a lot of people forget just how large some of these agencies are, and also, in many ways, how decentralized they are, right? They're working in parallel courtrooms. So can you each just paint a picture for us as to sort of the kind of the size of the system and just how many things are going on across, your counties, 5 boroughs during the day, and then as you also try to think about how that person, that frontline officer, kind of views his or her role today and what you're trying to do in terms of the way they're trying to view their system. So Anna, you want to start there?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the most challenging things. So in New York City, we have 1,000 employees. There are about 7 layers between me and a line staff PO. In the adult system, about 4 or 5 in juvenile. And so one of the things that is really important is to really harness your champions within. Right now, I have what we'll call my cabinet is made up of 2 deputy commissioners, 1 for juvenile, 1 adult, a deputy for administration, and the general counsel. And because of work that had been done before me, frankly, because that paved the way, I was able to, the 2 deputy commissioners that exist right now in the operations in juvenile adult are people who are essentially have been at probation 20-something years and believe in this. So when I get booted because of the political process, they remain. And the worst thing that can happen to them is a demotion because they're they have civil service titles and rights. And they will continue to pass along this, philosophy. Then I'm going to use a phrase that's not mine, but I love it. It's like every organization has an army of the willing, and you have to find it and grow it. And and so I've spent a lot of time working from within also to work on the skill set and making sure that of probation officers and supervisors and making sure everybody knows what the current research is on everything, because that will not be taken away from them by another political wave necessarily. If we can get everybody to work with people on probation from a fundamental place of humanity and zero tolerance for behavior that hurts other people, but focused on the humanity of the folks that we work with, then we'll be able to advance a practice for years and years to come, I think.
Thanks, Anna. Teresa?
You know, one of our core descriptions of our department, and this is in our mission vision statement, but it's in our everyday language, and it is respect. I've been in Harris County since 2013, and one of the things that a value that we put first and foremost is respect for the individuals we serve, our clients that are under supervision, and respect for each other. So as we've been working to sort of shift the culture, you know, our probation officers really have come a long way. They understand that everyone that comes before them is a person that has a family and there are needs. And their job is to be a change agent. And most of the officers really have embraced that. But that's come along only because we've also changed the structure and how the system works. If you don't make that change, it's hard to be a believer if, you know, judges are still expecting them to let them know for every rule break, I want to know now. So one of the things I have spent a good bit of my time in Harris County on, very much in the beginning and continue to do, is getting our judges to understand what we do. And it starts with a good assessment of course, risk, but needs, barriers, mental health, substance abuse. We get that in early. We get that before conditions are set. And our stakeholders now understand that we set up a success plan for our clients in the very beginning. So working with our judicial branch, to our judges, to change their approach has also reinforced the understanding from our officers that we are change agents.
So I'm going to create a hypothetical for you, for both of you, and then I'm going to come to you, Bob, in just a second. But let's just say, for argument's sake, I've just been hired to be the chief probation officer in Galveston, Texas, or in Buffalo, New York, okay? And I've asked you, before I even start, as seasoned community corrections administrators, probation leaders, to come into my department and say, you only have a day here, okay? What are the 3 things you're going to ask to sort of look at what the culture of my agency is, whether it's sort of moving in the direction that you're talking about? What are the, I'm going to leave and I'm going to come back at the end of the day and I want to know what you think of sort of where my staff are and where generally the direction that we're headed. What are the 3 things you're going to look at?
You want to take that?
One of the things I'm going to obviously want to know with the probation officers is, you know, where do you start? Tell me about your assessment process, and tell me about your first interaction with your probation clients. What happens? And then I want to know, tell me what happens, you know, on the other end of probation. You know,
what's that mean on the other end?
How do you help people succeed on probation? And honestly, those couple of questions almost immediately are going to tell me quite a bit.
So tell me the 2 extremes on both of those.
So the extremes are going to be, we get that assessment done, you know, as soon as the state makes us get it done, which immediately I already know they're sizing, they're not getting an individualized view of really what needs are going on with the person, and understanding the importance of not guessing at what someone needs, but listening and assessing and evaluating. And, you know, others will tell you, you know, my job is to do what the judge tells me to do. And I'm going to make sure these individuals are held accountable. You hear accountability repeatedly. If that is the number 1 word you hear, that tells me a lot. It's important that there's a balance. You know, people are held accountable, but they're also individuals that we are working to help succeed in a reasonable manner. So you really do want, it's where they're focused. And, you know, you'll either walk in and hear people focused on conditions and what the judge wants, or you'll hear people focused on success and how we get people to a sustainable life change.
And Anna, what are the questions you'll hear?
Very similar. I mean, I would. The first question I would ask is, why do you come to work every day? Why do you still want to do this work? And maybe tweak it a little bit here and there, but like, why? why did you first start coming to this work? Because what happens is also there's a jadedness that comes, with time and frustrations and that kind of stuff. Then I would ask, how do you define accountability? Because yes, people throw out that term a lot, but generally, a lot of people think accountability is punishment. Punishment is the only means for accountability, or negative sanctions is accountability. And you want to get a sense of, and then their conviction of, no pun intended, of whether they think people can change. Can adults change? Can they not? And what gets people to change? So that would be like my first three, and then would.
So, Bob, I know you're dying to get in, but just last question on, and then I'm going to bring it back to Bob. But what is the most satisfying answer for accountability? You said not just punishment. It's either a flip of that, but you talked about the challenges of defining success. So, what does that look like?
It's to own up to decisions and have sort of immediate reaction to the action, whether positive or negative, though. That accountability is done in a balance of, for lack of a better word, sort of law enforcement and growth and support, right? And so that you have to balance those things out. That punishment actually is not the best.
So you're saying we use accountability synonymous with response, when
yes,
in fact
exactly.
we should actually be talking about response.
And to actually be answerable to someone. That's the meaning of accountability.
Right, so how do you just respond to different behaviors?
Yeah.
Okay, Bob, you're on.
I really want to focus. I would be asking the people in the probation department a few questions. First, how are you going to restore a particular individual to his community, and also reconcile that person to the person that was offended, the victims of the crimes that are involved here? And I don't think that most victims really feel that the criminal justice system is really addressing their needs and issues in a restorative way, or in any manner. Most folks, or many people, simply don't want to be involved with the criminal justice system because they feel it doesn't address their issues and concerns. Also, let's recognize something that's profound here. A majority of the people who are involved in the criminal justice system and who are on probation, or a very, very large number, are between the ages of 18 and 25. We know a lot more about adolescent development now than we did a decade ago, and until our systems bring adolescent development into the way they're thinking about how people are behaving in the system, we're not going to be very successful. In addition, we know a lot more that's come on in the last 10 to 15 years about trauma and trauma-informed care, and until we address the trauma that people have been dealing with in their lives, we're not going to be able to address the problems that they're dealing with. And we haven't even talked about educational deficiencies and issues and problems. We haven't really talked about mental health disorders and so forth. We got to address all those things before all these legal concepts are overlaid into the lives of people, because these things really want to address the underlying issues and concerns. So if I'm asking the questions, I'm trying to find out whether people even know about these ideas and whether they're addressing these kinds of concerns, because if they're not, we're not really solving problems. All we're doing is enhancing the poverty in our system and enhancing the problems that people are going to be dealing with. We haven't solved a lot. So we have to use the knowledge that is now here in the science. Finally, there's so much new science about probation that we're not taking into consideration. Pennsylvania is one of the most supervised states in the entire nation and in the entire world. Why do we have so many people on probation and parole? We are right behind Georgia as the worst place in the entire country. Why is that? We've got to address those issues and concerns. Until we think long and hard about them, we're not going to be able to solve them. Now, let me just take a step back and say something that people need to hear, and that is this. I was one of those people who was involved in the criminal justice system as a public defender for 27 years. And a lot of time, I didn't give a lot of thought to, well, let's add a few more years of probation, because that was the culture I was a part of. Now we have a new enlightenment, and all of us are going to have to take a step back and recognize this new science and this new enlightenment and try and deal with it. We need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission to help address our own wrongdoing so that we can do better going into the future. And until we get that here in this city and in this state, we have problems, because we are fighting each other over whether we need to bring about change, and we can't get to culture change until we recognize that the old culture was not the best way forward.
Good.
I'm going to do something very risky, because that just got a lot of applause, and now I'm about to I'm going to channel a different perspective, right? I'm old school law enforcement now, right? And so I heard everything that all three of you just said, and this is why probation, is not a very legitimate tool in my eyes of sort of fighting crime. You guys are talking about helping people succeed and, all the culture change and everything else. If it were up to me, we would have actually taken a much stiffer punishment from the beginning. They wouldn't have been on probation. And, you guys are out there just coddling folks while we're out there trying to make sure that there's consequences for criminal behavior. So how do you talk to that sort of person? Because we all know that's a perspective that's real in a lot of different jurisdictions. What's the response to that?
Well, we would be talking for a while, but because it's not an easy thing. But the whole notion of what coddling is, right? And I think that's why to have a very, very definitive definition of what accountability is important, right? So that if something's not going right, you don't need to send somebody to jail. You can increase their supervision level. You can, it's like you want to end up with, trust me, anything that somebody who's on probation does gets accounted for and dealt with immediately. It may not be that flashy way that you would know, right? Because yes, you're right, we don't use incarceration to deal with a lot of the stuff, right? If somebody's hurting somebody else, yes, that will be on the table right away, right? And a violation of probation will be, right away. But the other pieces are important. And then I would also turn it on them because, and say, well, why don't you have you ever smoked? You ever smoked?
Come on, Teresa. My mother's probably watching this.
I'm sure you know people who smoke. Or you can go to, do you make any New Year's resolutions? Do you? No, probably not.
I did not adhere to many of them. But
exactly, right? But the system is asking these people to change their behavior immediately when most behavior doesn't, and personalize this situation. If we're here for behavior change, that doesn't happen because I told you to change and that you needed to do something different. So personalizing this of personal experiences of what it takes, right? And if somebody said, if you do that, you're just gonna end up, if you keep smoking, you're gonna end up in jail. Is that gonna help you? No, right? So it doesn't mean that we reject the behavior. It means that what it takes to change the behavior and then the back and forth of how many tries you have to go through is just gonna take time.
Teresa?
The one thing, and it really, honestly, the war on drugs has not ended in everyone's mind. And there are many, many consequences to that. But along with that, there is this very embedded belief that deterrence works. So if we just send you to jail longer, if we're just tougher on these crimes, then it's going to stop something. And when we talk about the science, there's an overwhelming amount of information that tells us that deterrence doesn't change behavior and it doesn't reduce crime. It's actually engaging with individuals as people. So one of the things I like to do is, first of all, talk about, do you have a teenager? Let's talk about your teenager. What happens if your teenager gets arrested? Do they do everything you tell them to do? Can they change their behavior? How hard is that? I thought it was really important that, you mentioned it a couple of minutes ago about developmental issues. But really, that is the conversation. But I will tell you repeatedly, deterrence comes up over and over, the concept, as something that is actually going to do something. And we know that that isn't true. So the ongoing education, as Anna says, is you can't change your behavior overnight.
Yep.
If you've tried to lose weight, if you've tried to quit smoking, if you've raised children, that is not possible. And really trying to, get it down to where the rubber meets the road in a very, real way where people can identify.
Just two themes that I really like coming out of this is how do we change behavior and how do we respond based on whether the person does or does not change behavior, right? Two very simple questions that actually could probe sort of a lot of different issues. Bob, last question to you, then we're going to open it up to the audience. I'm giving you a magic wand, something changes about probation in a couple of years. What is it?
We reduced the size of probation from 40,000 down to 20,000. And we have, of that 20,000, maybe about 5,000 of them are people that we're trying to find who've absconded. So we've really reduced the absconding numbers by half, but the overall population is at 20,000. And we're focusing on how we can help people be successful in probation, and we've moved it to the communities and provide real resources, particularly around jobs and employment. And we don't have people losing their jobs because they're standing in line somewhere waiting to report to their probation officers over and over again.
Questions? Yes, ma'am.
Good morning again. Darlene Miller, Chief, Philadelphia County Adult Probation and Parole. I am so glad that I'm able to be here for this segment. It's a little disconcerting that the perception of probation remains as I'm hearing today. I'd like to go on record to first say that we actually have 29,470 people in our active supervision. Now, we do have individuals who are in what we call wanted card status, and we have a program that's going to be commencing where we're going to be able to identify of our wanted card status, how many of those are actually still living. There's quite a bit of individuals who are out there who have passed away, and we don't have that information. Through the MacArthur grant, we are going to receive the death index summary, and so that's going to allow us to go in. I'd like to also to report, as far as Philadelphia County Adult Probation and Parole is concerned, we have many, many different initiatives that started. Back in 2009, we stratified our caseload, which we were able to identify low-risk offenders and supervise them accordingly. We actually have Monitor Connect, where those individuals don't even have to come in. So we're reducing the amount of contact that individuals are having. We have moderate supervision. Those individuals are reporting once a month. Not only that, we have specialized supervision where we're focusing on mental health. So we actually have DBH workers who are working within the confounds of our department, actually addressing the needs of those individuals. We do risk needs assessments. We do motivational interviewing. We do cognitive behavioral therapy. For our individuals who've been identified between the ages of 18 and 25, actually, we have YVRP, where we're working with PAN workers who are actually working alongside of the probation department. So it's a little disconcerting to hear when we talk about people losing their jobs because they're standing in line to report to their probation officer. That is not true. We actually make provisions for individuals who actually work. We have late night reporting so those individuals don't have to worry about losing their job. And should they need to come in, we adjust their schedule. So I really just want to go on record that there's a lot going on in Philadelphia County in which we're supervising individuals and supervising them effectively. So I'd like that record to show that.
Thank you very much. Yes, sir, question over here. Over here.
Good morning. Kevin Thomas, Building Wealth and Health Network. First and foremost, I wanted to thank the panel for all their hard work that they're doing in the community. Definitely appreciate it, definitely need it. Had a question about declassification. A crime of possession is met with treatment, but possession with intent to distribute is still considered a felony. And that also leads, should be considered a crime of desperation, a crime of poverty, but it leads to the disparity that we see with black and brown citizens in the population. Is there any discussion about declassifying that to something lower, and also retroactively declassifying it for people who still wear it as wear it from the war on crime, war on drugs, that is?
And just for those of us who are a little less familiar with some of the technical aspects of that question, Bob, can you do a little bit of what's the general offense that we're talking about?
We're talking possession of marijuana with intent to deliver, and also possession of other drugs with intent to deliver. The question is whether or not the district attorney's office is still prosecuting that particular offense, and the answer is yes, we are currently prosecuting felony offenses, possession with intent to deliver. Are there discussions about diverting those kinds of cases, perhaps for small amounts or smaller levels of possession. There are discussions, but we have not decided to move forward on that. The district attorney does have within his discretion the power to do that, but we're not operating on it at the present time. In terms of what many of us are aware, there are lots of discussions about the legalization of marijuana. New Jersey next door is having a very robust discussion about it. And one of the things that's a companion issue with legalization of marijuana in New Jersey is the idea that people who have been convicted of possession or possession with intent to deliver might have their records expunged or sealed, or somehow they would no longer suffer the long-term collateral consequences of those offenses. My great hope is that if the day comes when Pennsylvania legalizes marijuana, that we would do the same. The collateral consequences of possession or possession with intent to deliver marijuana are very severe. People cannot get jobs, or if they have jobs, many are still fired for them. And also they have very great difficulty just moving through society in a constructive and positive way. So we don't know what the future holds, but we're hoping that this drug, this prohibition that's been a scourge on our society will end, and end soon. We all recognize, or many of us recognize who've been working with the war on drugs, this. When I worked in juvenile court, the war on drugs had been going on for 20 or 30 years, and you couldn't even find a program that would address the substance use disorders of children at all in the city and county of Philadelphia unless you were adjudicated delinquent and went into placement. So how do we have a war when we're trying to get people off drugs and we don't even provide a basis for giving them treatment? We've solved some of those problems, but a lot of other problems are going on. There's a lot of concern about the discrimination that was impacted upon African Americans and others in the crack cocaine scores that we had in the early 90s, when if you were involved with crack, the punishment was much more severe than if you were involved with powdered cocaine. And now when we come and we're trying to address the opioid crisis, we're trying to find ways to decriminalize the behavior of those who are engaged in the opioid crisis. I think we do need to treat it as a public health crisis. We need to recognize what happened to black and brown people with the crack crisis. And we need to find ways to address and rehabilitate those people who've been punished severely for that. So that's a longer answer than you probably anticipated, but we are thinking about those aspects of the issue as well.
Thanks, Bob. Kara, you had a question.
I just had a quick question. The intersection of our first and second panel. What are the violation practices when there's a new arrest? In Cook County, one of the big drivers of our population was every single time someone got arrested that was on probation, a no bond violation of probation petition was filed. So even if the person was releasable on their new case, they were held no bond. And I've had a heck of a time breaking that system.
So just not sure if everybody could hear that question. What's the status of somebody who violates probation, return to jail? Is that a no bail situation? Right. Anna, you want to answer?
So most of the time in New York City, they're not held on the violation of probation petition if we file it. If they're held on the driver for detention is the new case, generally. It used to be, though, that when we filed the violation, we asked for jail time, prison immediately, and we've stopped doing that. We also only file when if it's a felony, when the person has been indicted, unless it's a murder case or one like a major violent crime, because we've learned that about a third, and that's a conservative statistic, about a third of arrests don't result in further proceedings or in any conviction. And so we don't want to file at arrest because that is just following police practices and stamping police practices, and we want to have some due process first. And so those are the things. But we would love to influence, though, the bail decisions in the new case as well, but we haven't found a way of doing that.
Kier?
Thank Chief Probation Officer Darlene Miller for explaining what they've been doing. Excuse me. I have no doubt that there are some great things going on. But what I wanted to ask, and here are some of the challenges that we are seeing with probation and probationers, particularly the ones that work in our office, because we hire a lot of people that are returning citizens. The risk assessment that is used to determine what obligations they will have on probation. We have people that have had, in Pennsylvania, we have a hybrid of parole and then probation tails. When you get out of your minimum sentence, you're on parole. So we have people that have had non-reporting parole that have been doing well. And then when they get on probation, they become high risk and now have to report once a week. So one of the questions that I have is that why is a probationer's status never changed from high risk? How do they begin in high risk and end up in high risk, even if they made considerable advances and showed that during parole, which is still community supervision, that they've done exceptionally well?
Well, let's first get rid of parole followed by probation. Okay, that's ridiculous. I mean, that doesn't happen in New York State. We don't have that in New York State. But I know so many jurisdictions where that happens, where the lesser included offense gets probation, and that's crazy. I'm sorry. Talk about keeping people under the thumb of government, et cetera. So, having said that, what we've done in New York City is, and in New York State, is that the risk assessment has to be redone every 6 months. It gets reviewed by people, and risk is supposed to be going down as, if you're using a risk assessment instrument that is truly a dynamic one, and they all have flaws, trust me, I know. Your intervention should have been, creating a reduction in risk. Having said that, though, the science or the research behind reassessments is not very strong right now. So we don't really know what it's really measuring or not, right? But you certainly shouldn't go from, a certain lower risk to a high risk within months if you were doing well, on parole. I mean, that should not happen. If somebody is staying on the same risk level, you got to look at the work we're doing, because we're doing something wrong. If that person, especially if they're not getting rearrested either, like that should be a very big red flag.
And let me say, Anna, DA Krasner is totally opposed to these tails on top of probation, on top of parole. So he thinks it's a dumb idea.
It is a dumb idea. So one thing, let me say, first of all, there are several risk assessments still out there. And the old risk assessments around community supervision and parole used to be heavy weight on criminal history,
right.
which just sets up disparity. It sets someone up. It doesn't work. We revalidated the Ohio risk assessment system. Community supervision tool actually did that along with my colleague, Brian Levins, in Texas on our population. And criminal history is 1 point, the same as the other domains. We have great science where we know what predicts the likelihood of success or our failure. And they are dynamic variables, and they're things that you would expect, very much so. Who you're spending your time with, your peers. What's going on, instability in your family, and lack of support. Those are ongoing. Education, employment. So effective programming and targeting those in those domains are really, really critical, and they do bring risk down. The other thing, though, I want to caution people as, and I've done a lot to educate my system when we look at risk assessment. Our focus is on if we do find people with higher risk and needs. So we're looking at both. So making sure people understand what we're saying when we say high risk. We're saying people have a lot of needs that need to be addressed. And what we create is a risk reduction plan. And we're going to help them succeed. And no one changes overnight. I agree with Anna. It's hard to understand how someone would immediately go from low to high. You just don't see that. You really don't. I do think it takes a reasonable amount of time if someone has a lot of needs to get them where they need to be. But I don't think we need to get so fixated on a label in and of itself. It's really more important on where they're making progress and why.
Mike, I just said, I think there's one thing where there's tremendous collaboration between the probation department, the chief of the Defender Association, and the district attorney's office, and that is in addressing early bail review and also in addressing detainer hearings, which come as a result of people being arrested for a second offense. We've been actively engaged in addressing these for many months, and it's helped reduce the jail population quite significantly here in Philadelphia County. So we have areas of collaboration and areas of difference.
Quick question on behavioral health. I've got it in the last one. I know it's such a big issue for your supervision officers. There's a lot of different treatment providers. These are not rural communities we're talking about, and I know there's nowhere near the treatment supply and capacity we need, but there's a good number of treatment providers, and frankly, varying degrees of capacity to actually treat well this population. Talk to me just a little bit about your confidence level in the kind of the treatment system. Is that really an officer by officer decision as to sort of who's getting linked to sort of what treatment and what you know about that treatment works? If you had a wand you could wave, I know you'd want more of it, but just tell me more about the actual providers that they get linked to. Quick comments from either Houston or New York on this.
Oh, it varies. I mean, we have a lot of providers in New York City, certainly, and of varying qualities and whatnot. And we have in our probation department, we have a community resource unit whose entire job is to go out and interface with providers, assess whether they're using research-informed or evidence-based practices and quality, and keep a referral database for our officers to use when when needed. We also had a mental health task force, city task force, that resulted in us getting funding for having behavioral health staff in our offices. So each one of our juvenile offices and each one of our adult offices has what we call a clinical advisor to help probation officers both identify issues and find resources and help the clients navigate the mental health system to be able to access. It's not great. We're not doing a great job at it by any stretch of the imagination, but it is something that's embedded in the practice enough that I don't think it's to the point that it's just if an officer happens to think about it or no, there's a machinery that will channel that, at the moment.
So we're gonna go to our closing remarks here, but just real quickly, Teresa and Bob, anything you want to squeeze in the last 30 seconds on this
on
question?
behavioral health,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to skip over that too quickly. I can tell you that the number one reason that we have improved successes is that we have an independent assessment unit that has, licensed clinicians embedded in the system. We assess those needs before probation conditions are set. You have to get it right to start with. That will drive every single thing that happens. And we also do we provide services within our department and in our community. And we do go out and make sure that we're sending people to places that are doing practices that we know to work. Some that need to be trauma-informed, some that are COG, and some that are addressing mental health and substance abuse in an integrated fashion. So it's an absolutely critical cross-section, and there needs to be a lot more discussion on it.
Thanks, Teresa. Bob, last
Just real quick, our MacArthur Safety and Justice Challenge has recognized that I believe about 700 of the 4,500 people in our county jail have significant mental health disorders. And so they've helped us, including our mental health unit in the district attorney's office, work to transition people from the county jail to programs outside of the jail, which would be some of the probationary programs. Not as familiar with the specific programs they have, but we've been doing a lot of work to make those successful.
Terrific. I'm going to ask my friend and colleague, the Vice President for the Philadelphia program, Fraser Rita Clausen, come up to the mic here and give us some closing remarks. But as she makes her way up to the stage, please join me in thanking our wonderful panel.
So I actually have the best job of the day because I get to thank all of these wonderful people for a riveting and informative discussion today. And I'm so grateful for everybody's participation that I'm going to take the time to go through them by name because their contribution to our understanding of these important issues has been so powerful today. Now, I skipped the introduction part, so I know my colleagues around the table are saying, please tell them you're Fraser Rita Klassen. Yes, it's a family name. My father was Fraser, my great-grandfather was Fraser, so I'll get that out of the way. I'm the vice president who oversees the Pew Charitable Trusts work in Philadelphia. And on behalf of Pew, I really want to thank everyone for joining us today. So first, a big thank you to our panelists, Ana Bermudez from the New York City Department of Probation. I'm from the South Bronx. I'm glad to see you here. Robert Lisenby from the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office, and Teresa May from Harris County, the Department of Texas Community Supervision and Corrections. And I don't want to forget our first panel, Rachel Eisenberg. I hope Rachel is still here. She's around over there from the Philadelphia Managing Director's Office. Keir Bradford Gray from the Defender Association of Philadelphia. Jennifer Perez from the New Jersey Judiciary, and Cara Smith from the Cook County Sheriff's Office. And then I have a lot of other thank yous I have to make. First of all, to my fabulous colleague, Michael Thompson. I've only gotten to know Michael over about the last year and a half, and it's been a wonderful pleasure for me to be able to learn from him, join forces with him, collaborate with him, and I'm really grateful to your participation today. And Larry Eichel, who has created the brand of State of the City, that's informed the city so much on so many issues. Thank you for all of your work. And then we have just a great team at Pew that I just have to acknowledge them, both in our Philadelphia Policy Exchange led by Eleanor Hyder, Larry I already mentioned, their great staff, Brett Beckerson, Seth, Octavia, Katie Martin is somewhere around here, Liz Lowe, who's our communications person. One of the things I really enjoy about the role that I have at Pew right now is sort of helping to forge the collaboration between our colleagues in DC and those in Philadelphia. We have our terrific representatives of our terrific public safety and performance staff here. I've been delighted to learn from them and have us work together to address some of the key issues that face the city and the region. And I want to thank all of you who are in the room, who've been watching online and on Twitter, for joining us and taking part in this conversation. We hope that what you heard today was informative and helpful. If you'd like more information on Pew's recent research and policy work in Philadelphia and the topic of criminal justice, please visit our website at pewtrust.org, Philadelphia Research, where you can also sign up for our monthly newsletter, which will keep you up to date on our latest reports and findings. Thank you again, and please feel free to stay and mingle. If you checked your coat and everything, I hear that closes at 11:30, so just keep an eye on that. All right, thank you all.
Great panel. Thank you so much. That was wonderful.